Today, the second and final part of Memories of Martin. With tensions mounting at the Jesuit farm community in Guelph, the provincial, Father Eric McLean, decided to remove Martin and assign him to a mission in Jamaica. It was an inspired move. In Jamaica, Martin was to flourish. He became something of an icon to his adoring community. And it was there, to their horror and sorrow, that he met his untimely end. Memories of Martin, Part 2.
The first impression that Martin made on people was very often not a good impression because of his slovenliness, because of his shyness. He was awkward, didn't express himself well. Surprising, given his immense intelligence and articulateness when he was relaxed and comfortable. First impressions weren't particularly attractive. On the other hand, if you stayed around long enough to realize his compassion, his goodness, his zeal, his passion about life and about what was right and truth and all of that, then you would see, as some have said, a diamond in the rough.
He was the type of person who you could look up to.
Rosalind Bender, principal of the primary school in May River.
There was no sophistication. He was very simple. His mannerism was, to me, what a Christian should really be.
The more I looked at him, the more I associated with him, the more I spoke with him, I realized that he had hidden potentials that were never utilized before. I think when he came to Jamaica, he had a sense that, I can just open up and do so many things here.
Martin's bluntness did work here because people in Jamaica, they do tend to speak out and say what's on their mind, and much more so than we would in Canada. And so Martin fit right in. They would say things right out to him, and he'd say things right back to them, and he just fit in very well that way.
Sister Nancy Sullivan, a Sister of St. Joseph from Hamilton, Ontario, who along with Sister Anne Marshall assisted Martin with his work until the end.
I got to know Martin's daily routine because I would often be in the chapel in the morning, say around 6 or 6:30, and I would hear this coughing coming down the road, and I knew that was Martin coughing. And then he would get to the church, and then he had to undo the padlock on the grill before he could get to the door, and it would go clang, clang, clang. So sometimes if I was still in bed, that's the sound that would wake me up in the morning, Martin arriving at church. And then, so he'd be there from 6 or 6:30, sometimes earlier, and then we would have Mass at 8 o'clock in the morning, and then we would just go on our ways from there. And then he'd be in and out all day, going up the different communities and around and about, and then he'd be back in the office, and then at about 8:30 or so at night, he would go home for his supper. But during the day, never had breakfast or lunch. He would just have coffee and cigarettes.
I found him to be the most dedicated priest I have ever seen, because he didn't have time for himself. It's just the grace of God, I think, kept him going, and the smoking.
Martin's whole vision was for the sake of the mission. Martin was here for nothing else but to move the mission and to provide a livelihood and a better life for the people that he knew God loved best, the poor.
He loves poor people. He loves the lower class people because he thinks they get the least recognition from anyone. So he's always there for them.
Father Martin is somebody who he got involved in doing what is to be done. His sister got ill and couldn't move around, she was a widow. And she didn't have any money. She had things in her farm, which was far away in the hills, very rugged area. She had pimento ready to be reaped, but she had no one to go and reap it. Father Martin went and he got some youngsters on the street to go with him. Got them to reap the pimento. They put it in bags. And he, along with them, carried those bags with pimento down. And he took it to her house and presented it to her. And when she saw what he did, she told me that she cried. You know, she didn't believe a priest would have done something like that for her.
When I come here, I can feel the spirit of Father Martin. Wherever he stands and encourages us, many of the time we would just go there and we would just feel as if Father Martin is right there encouraging us. And it helps us to push on, to do our work and to plant so that we can reap today.
Dear Doug, right now I'm reading Vita Consecrata, the Pope's exhortation about religious life. It's rather long and tedious. More interesting reading has been a book that Monty left here called Thoughts Without a Thinker by someone named Epstein. It seems to me that the connection between spirituality and psychology lies in the area of accepting both oneself and outside things the way they are. And I ask myself, why should I be so angry? The world has never been arranged for my pleasure or convenience, not even in my childhood. More and more now, I find myself preaching on themes of acceptance and surrender.
Acceptance and surrender. In the 20 years since he entered the novitiate, Martin Royackers had come a long way.
He would go out with farmers and for example, if they were going to go someplace to look for water, and he would go through hill and valley and in very rough terrain, and he'd be right there, or if they were laying a water pipe, he'd be right there sweating in the midst of it. Or sometimes he would go to Kingston and he'd pick up fertilizer on his pickup. And usually he'd pick up 2 tons of fertilizer to put them on his 1-ton pickup. And then he'd drive back, and often he came back from Kingston late at night, like 10 o'clock or 11 o'clock at night. He would go to the farmer's field where they had a shed and unload the fertilizer there by himself. Probably wouldn't take more than 10 minutes to chuck it all off and pile it up. But that kind of thing, he was, and people were, he would just enter into work like that, and people were impressed. I mean, he had no sense, there was nothing in him that said, well, a priest shouldn't do this or a priest shouldn't do that.
In 1990, the Jesuits began a rural development program for farmers based on the organization of marketing cooperatives. These activities would sometimes collide with powerful vested interests. The center of this cooperative movement was the parish church in Onoto Bay.
I work with Father Martin in the cooperative, and he has done extremely well with the farmers. I think he has gone the extra mile where no one would have gone.
If you want to see the truth of Martin's life, I would suggest you take a look at the people that he worked with. You see the kind of love that they had for him. You see the way that he transformed the hillside communities in very simple ways, but in very profound ways.
We just plant the things Father Martin would inspire us. Mr. Miller plant some cassava, plant some pap choy, plant some callaloo, and he would tell us whatever the crop by, and we would just go and plant whatever he told us to plant, and then when it reap, we would know that we have our right market for it.
On Sundays, we would take our produce to the Fort George Co-op shop, and then a lady would be there now selecting the good one from the bad ones, right? Then on Monday, the truck would take it to Kingston, like sell hotel, supermarket.
Father Martin Struck was like a boss in this community, and it was also the poor people's hearse. If we are going somewhere, transportation is sometimes hard to come by, but Father Martin Struck is always available. And if you see the amount of us he carried on the back of that truck, and we would sing and beat our drum, and we are gone. Rocky roads, wherever it is, we are gone on the back of that truck. You know, sometimes when it's raining, sometimes we are wet, but we are going. And sometimes even when someone gets sick and they can't afford to charter a car to take them to the hospital, they just have to send to Father Martin. And he comes with his truck and he takes that person to the hospital.
Although he was with the people, he was a person who tried to lift them up, not to go down to their level. But he entered into their situation in his own special way, and that was appreciated.
He wanted to see them, in some sense, make a life for themselves, but I think what he discovered was that the other important component to their development was a spiritual component.
Martin, I would say, better than anybody else that I have met, came to understand how Jamaicans respond in terms of liturgical expression.
A reading from the Holy Gospel according to St. Matthew. Jesus said to his apostles, "A disciple is not above the teacher, nor a slave above the master. It is enough for the disciple to be like the teacher, and the slave like the master."
Father Martin did a lot for the liturgy. It is more charismatic, it's more fun, it's more lively. Because once you're there and you're sort of dead, he's going to liven you up, even to give a joke. And then you have to start laughing. And when you're singing, you got to stand up and you got to sing and stomp your feet and praise the Lord. And he would say to us, "Panchita, you know why you don't come to church on time? You stay home to press your clothes. Come to church on time, don't press your clothes." You know, he was so different.
He helped people to be who they truly could be. You know, he didn't put down their revivalism, praise the Lord kind of thing, even though that's not his thing. He's not a charismatic person in that way. But he recognized that that was part of who people were, and he encouraged that in any way he could, with the crusades and immersion baptisms and the lively liturgy and the hot preaching. So I think he helped people to recognize what was deep inside and to bring it to the surface.
Martin was a master of English, and so he rewrote the various parts of the Mass, the Holy, 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 the Lamb of God, the Our Father, to these rhythms and with words adjusted to these rhythms.
He makes sure every Sunday when we have the sharing of peace, everyone have to move around, and whether you're going to shake hands or you're going to hug, and he is always there observing. So worship then was no longer boring. It was this active spiritual feeling, you know, and you just want to be in church. Father Martin had a keen interest in developing education in this community. He was instrumental in creating the basketball court at May River School. He had the yard paved, and so now the students have basketball. And he also supplied us with equipment for physical education. He would give us footballs, basketballs, whatever it is we need, he would try to give it to us. Father Martin was a father to all the school children. He ensured that no child would go hungry. He would always say to me, Miss Bender, make sure every child is fed. No child was afraid of him, you know? And once the sea struck coming, they know Father Martin is coming.
I think he was happy here, and it's the kind of thing, for instance, he wouldn't know how he was going to relate to North America anymore because he felt here that he connected with people.
One time, Martin was going away to a spiritual program for 6 weeks, and this was probably the longest he was ever going to be away from Jamaica. And he said to me, well, I don't know how this is going to go, 6 weeks, I'm going to be away 6 weeks. And I said to him, now Martin, I said, I think the people will be able to live without you for 6 weeks. And he said, I have no doubt that they will. He says, but I don't know whether I can live without them.
This past summer, I took a 2-month course in spirituality in Omaha, Nebraska, and took full advantage of all the perks I missed in Jamaica. I tried hard to conform to the North American middle class, but I couldn't seem to do it. Some sort of visceral claustrophobia made me want to open the windows and say F the air conditioning, but I didn't. Instead, I longed to return home to Jamaica, to the constant and oppressive heat, the kitchen with its rats scrabbling in the roof, the ubiquitous mosquitoes, the neighbors who engage in loud domestic disputes every evening. I may not be so comfortable in Jamaica, but like the morning's first drag on a cigarette, the noise and heat and insect bites remind me, with an occasional rush, that I'm alive.
Miss Thompson and Father Martin didn't always see eye to eye. She had one son, and he drowned when he was 15 years old. She told me later that when Martin heard that, he went up and he got down on his knees in front of her and held her hands in his. And she said it was like his strength coming through to her and to help her be strong.
Martin left the comfortable rectory. He lived in a house by the sea, the poorest of the poor. If you're not a man of prayer, the sort of work that Martin was doing, you would not have survived. To be in absolute abject poverty, to be living with people who have no hope and trying to bring hope, unless you're connected to a higher source, you could not do that effectively. You could do it for a year or two, but then you'd run out of steam, out of gas, and you'd be just like a windbag. So he must have had a solid relationship with his God in order to do what he did. It was not simple. It looked simple from the outside. He had a Herculean task. It was very difficult.
Actually, I find that he was so close to us that he didn't really come to work in Jamaica or with Jamaicans. He became a native of Jamaica.
He had similarities with John the Baptist. On a sort of superficial level, the camel hair and wild locusts and all of that image of John the Baptist in the wilderness seemed to fit Martin. Rough and ready and unkempt and whatever, rugged. There were also, I think you could say in a more profound way, that he understood very clearly his mission as to prepare the way of the Lord. And there was no confusion in his mind that he was the Messiah, or that he was the Savior, or that he was the one who was to be served, or to be honored, or to be praised.
He strikes me as kind of a St. Paul figure. He's somebody that's gone through some kind of an important experience, religious experience, and it has made him focus on mission almost entirely, maybe at the expense of personal life, and has made him, like St. Paul, kind of an uncompromising person, no middle ground. We either choose Christ or we don't choose Christ.
In terms of prophetic voice, yes, it is true that he would, I think he very clearly saw what Jesuits should be, what the church should be, and what Christianity should be in the face of the world. So in that sense, he lived and preached a prophetic message.
He mentioned to me on 2 occasions that on coming into the house late at night when he was living there alone, that youth were there, that they were armed, that they asked him for money. He asked me not to tell anybody. In retrospect, I wonder if I should have told somebody.
It's not clear who killed him or for what reason. At first, we didn't think that robbery was a very likely motive because he had money in his back pocket. There are sort of subsequent rumors that robbery was a possibility, but then they didn't mean to kill him. And when they killed him, they were shocked and then fled and didn't bother robbing him because they realized something graver had happened.
It was difficult for me to deal with his death and to accept it. But I think he was ready. I think it's like his whole life, that the way he lived, and even those last days, it's like he knew. Looking back at it now, it's easy to say, but not then. But it's like he had things to finish. He had business to complete, and he completed them. And like he was ready to go. But I wasn't ready to lose him as yet.
And I came from that gate, and when I turned from the gate, I saw him by that door there.
I felt like a part of me had been cut away. I felt as if I was going to die. That's how I felt.
For a long time after Martin died, I would find myself crying. And I think part of it was that when Martin died, it wasn't just him, it was the dreams for our communities.
We went to school and we could not start school. Each time I tended to start school, the kids started crying. And I remember we prayed and I had to just let them sit there. They couldn't do anything.
A few days before the funeral, we all went outside to the site where Martin had died. And right at that spot there was a small table. One of the parishioners had made a wooden cross, put it there. Someone else had draped a piece of black cloth around it. And sitting on the table, along with a candle, was a bottle of Red Stripe beer and a pack of Craven cigarettes. I believe it was Father Norm who was the one that incensed the site. And so I must say I've never seen a bottle of beer and a pack of cigarettes incensed before, but it was honoring the site where Martin had died. And the shrine, they call it a little shrine, spoke very much of who Martin was, very down-to-earth, earthy man, but also very spiritual too with the cross.
If I was Father Martin's mother, I'd feel blessed because Father Martin left so much legacy for us in Jamaica to live by. And it's just like when Jesus was on earth. People changed their life because of Father Martin. And they tell a lot of story because of Father Martin, just like how they tell a lot of story about Jesus.
My feeling is that he's with God. I'm not trying to canonize him, but the life he lived, the way he died, the way he sacrificed for his people, I think it was very, very, very beautiful and very moving and very inspiring to all Jamaica. I'm very sorry that he left us that way. I'm very saddened for his parents, for his relatives and friends. It's a very hard pill to swallow. here's a man who came and gave his life, and at the end, we took it away from him. May his soul rest in peace.
The people of Tinsbury, Jamaica frequently urge me to call government officials and beg for electricity. We long for light, they say. I make calls and bring back reports. Tinsbury is in phase 1 of the rural electrification program, or they're at the other end of the island now, or maybe next year. But despite the official procrastination, the day will certainly come. I contemplate it with some regret. I go up to Tinsbury in the evening for church council meetings, and as we leave the church carrying kerosene bottles with their smoky flames, the hills are bathed in moonlight. Here we leave an evening meeting to the soft murmur and laughter of easy camaraderie. Whatever the contentions and quarrels of the meeting, everyone's spirit is softened in the night's beauty and stillness. I tell people it won't be so nice when they have electricity. I tell them electricity doesn't make people better. It just gives them more opportunities to be worse. I warn them that people will stop coming to church events because they'll be watching television. And to all these mournful admonitions they reply, "Yes, Father, it's true, but we long for light." And why should they listen to me? I drive away to my house where there's light, a cold drink, and leftovers in the fridge, an electric fan to cool me. Our hearts are restless until they rest in ease. Someday the people of Tinsbury will get light, and then they'll long for telephones. They'll get telephones and long for washing machines. They'll get washing machines and long for cars. There'll always be something to long for. I tell the people of Tinsbury that people in North America may be richer, but they're no happier. "Yes, Father," they reply, "but we long for light." Of course, life in Tinsbury can be hard, and electricity would ease a bit of the burden. I don't really oppose it. But I rather wish before they eagerly leap onto the slippery slope, they would stop and ask themselves where they'll draw the line. Perhaps they might agree to use created things only insofar as they help in a quest for human wholeness, and to reject them insofar as they are a hindrance. Perhaps they'll discover that the pursuit of a life of ease is not enough to give sense and depth to one's life. After all, when I go home now to my well-lit cocoon of comfort, I find myself also longing for light.
If you want to judge somebody's ministry, you judge it by how well they formed people to express their faith and to carry on. And I would say that Martin discovered in the hills of Anato Bay a very precious community of believers. And if there was a legacy, it was a legacy that he found this pearl of great price. It's not so much about Martin, it's about the kingdom. And I think Martin contributed what he wanted to contribute. He discovered the pearl of great price, and he did. He sold everything and as a merchant and bought that pearl. And the pearl, as far as I understand, is doing well.
Was he a saint? That's beyond my competence to answer. But of one thing I am sure, Pope Francis would have loved him. Happy